Hi, I'm Claire, and I'm 18. My mom died 5 years ago, and recently, Dad decided to get married again. When I saw Fiona for the first time, I liked her. She was acting friendly, praising my dress and the cake I had baked for the occasion. But when Dad went into the other room, her behavior changed completely. Fiona scornfully declared that she didn't eat sugar and I didn't know how to dress at all. Since then, Fiona had been pretending to be a caring mom while Dad was around to see it, and being horrible when we were left alone. One day she even framed me. She used some money from Dad's credit card and said it was me. But I knew for sure that she had spent the money. I had seen a delivery guy bring her an expensive branded bag. The most annoying thing was that Dad believed her and not me. Claire, it's high time you became a bit more responsible. If you did something bad, admit it, and do not shift the blame to someone else. Fiona really pissed me off. Dad blamed me every time we argued, and I began to rarely appear at home. So when my boyfriend Eric invited me over for the weekend, I gladly agreed. We went to the mountains, we hiked, roasted marshmallows over the fire, slept in a tent. Long story short, we had a great time. And then Eric suggested we go into a cave. I was actually scared of the dark, but with Eric next to me, I was not afraid of anything. We took flashlights and climbed into the cave. A cloud of bats immediately flew out to meet us. I screamed and wanted to run back, but Eric took my hand and calmed me down. My heart was pounding like crazy. Soon I grew to like our adventure. I looked at the stone walls around us with interest and even decided to move away from Eric. All of a sudden, a strange vibration swept through the cave. Before I knew it, everything around us suddenly began to collapse. There was a cave-in and I came to in a hospital. When I woke up, I didn't immediately realize where I was. My whole body was covered with bandages, and I panicked. But then, Dad came into the room and explained what had happened. Eric hadn't been injured. My life was also no longer in danger, and I calmed down a little. At that moment, I didn't know the worst was yet to come. When they took the bandages off and I saw myself in the mirror, I almost fainted. There was no trace of my beauty left. My eyes looked small, my nose was crooked, and there were ugly scars all over my body. I burst into tears and asked the nurse to call the plastic surgeon who had performed my surgery. I demanded that he fix everything, but Mr. Brown said that he had already done everything he could. I tried to get used to my new appearance while I was in the hospital, but I couldn't do it, and often cried. On the day of the discharge, I went to Mr. Brown for a routine checkup. He was late, and I decided to wait for him in his office. I sat down in a chair and noticed a folder with a photo on its cover on his table. It couldn't be. Fiona was in the photo. I moved the folder closer to me and realized that those were hospital records. Fiona had had a lot of plastic surgery, and before that, she had been ugly. Did Dad know about it? As I was putting the folder back in its place, I noticed something else that was interesting. Before her marriage, Fiona had had the same last name as my doctor, Brown. Was it just a coincidence, or all of a sudden I heard footsteps outside the door? I quickly closed the folder and sat back in my chair. Mr. Brown examined me and said that I could be discharged. I decided to ask him directly about Fiona. When I started talking about her, Mr. Brown's face changed. I even thought he looked scared. Yeah, we're related. Fiona is my sister. When the accident happened to you, she immediately called me and asked for help. After all, I'm the best plastic surgeon in the city. It made sense, but we were talking about my stepmother who hated me. Why had she suddenly decided to help me, or was I wrong and she wasn't that bad? I told my dad about Fiona's surgeries, but he sided with her again. He said he didn't see anything wrong with plastic surgeries. After I got discharged, my life wasn't the same again. Before the surgery, I had been beautiful and successful, and after that, I became an outcast. My college classmates were there for me, but no one talked to me the way they used to. Their pity annoyed me. I didn't want to be pitied at all. And then I got news that became the last straw for me. Eric and I had been working on a scientific project where we were going to present at a contest. However, while I had been in the hospital, another girl had taken my place. They had already applied for the contest together. I was in shock. I had put so much effort into that project, and someone else would get all the credit? The worst thing was that I found out about it from our curator. And Eric hadn't said a word to me. He was avoiding me and hadn't even visited me in the hospital. I slammed my fist on the table angrily. I wanted to cry, but decided to stay strong. The curator felt sorry for me and unexpectedly offered me a job. 3 times a week I teach math at an orphanage, but because of the contest I won't have time for it anymore. Do you want to replace me for a while? You're my most capable student, so you shouldn't have any issues. After giving it a little thought, I agreed. After all, I now had a lot of free time that I wouldn't spend preparing for the contest. Before the first class, I was terribly worried. Most of all, I feared that the children would be afraid of my appearance and scars. To my surprise, everything went just fine. I'd always loved children, and we quickly found a common language. During a break, I noticed that one boy was being bullied by other kids. Sam was ungainly, wore glasses, and his skin was covered with white spots. I googled it and found out that such a disease was called vitiligo. It meant problems with skin pigmentation. I shouted at Sam's bullies, took him aside, and calmed him down. From that day on, Sam was no longer bullied in my presence, and he often gave me gifts, drawings, and handmade postcards. It was very sweet. We became friends, and I started picking Sam up from the orphanage. We went for walks and rides and ate sweets in cafes. Sam was thrilled, and I didn't feel so lonely with him around anymore. One day, as we were walking, we accidentally met Fiona. She was leaving the mall with a bunch of bags. She'd probably spent all the money on Dad's credit card again. Fiona stopped abruptly when she saw us. She stared at Sam with her eyes wide open and rapidly turned pale. She dropped the bags and their contents scattered on the sidewalk. Fiona fainted, and a crowd gathered around her. I called an ambulance and Dad. Then I brought Sam back to the orphanage and, after coming back home, immediately went to Fiona. She was lying on the bed with her eyes closed. I thought she was still unconscious, but she seemed to have sensed my presence. She sat up and looked at me angrily. "How do you know about Sam? Who told you how to find him?" I was confused. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. Are you going to blackmail me?" Fiona looked insane, and I didn't argue with her anymore. After that conversation, I started to suspect that Fiona and Sam were in some way connected. The next day I went to the orphanage director and asked about Sam's parents. She refused to answer my questions, but I wasn't about to give up that easily. After waiting for the director to leave, I took the key from the security desk and made my way into her office. I found the documents I needed in the closet. It couldn't be. Fiona was Sam's mother. I had no words. I took photos of the documents, closed the office behind me, and went home. I wanted to show the photo to Dad, but he wasn't at home. However, I was in for another surprise that shocked me even more than Fiona and Sam being related had. I was walking to my room when I heard my stepmother talking on the phone. She hadn't noticed that I was back, so she was speaking loudly. "I don't care if your conscience torments you, dear brother. If you blab about it, you'll go to jail and nothing will happen to me." Fiona's talk with Mr. Brown intrigued me. I even pressed my ear against my bedroom door to hear better. "Stop whining. You didn't disfigure Claire. You just didn't fix anything." When I realized they were talking about me, I held my breath. My heart skipped a beat and then suddenly started pounding at a furious speed. Turned out that Mr. Brown had been blatantly lying to me. My looks could be fixed, but he hadn't done anything. Why? What had I done to them? Why did my stepmother hate me so much? When Dad came home from work, I showed him a photo of the documents and told him about the conversation I'd overheard. And then a miracle happened. For the first time in a while, he believed me. Dad was as shocked as I was. "I can't believe she's capable of something like this. We need to talk to that Mr. Brown and get to the bottom of it." We didn't say anything to Fiona and went to the hospital the next morning. Mr. Brown got nervous when he saw us. Dad didn't pull any punches. He grabbed him by the coat and pulled him towards himself. "Tell me what you did to my daughter now. If you try to lie, you will be put on trial. I promise you that." Mr. Brown was clearly scared. He pulled his head into his shoulders and looked down. "You're right. I deserve to go to jail. It's all because of my sister. As a child, Fiona was very ugly and she was constantly bullied. So when she turned 18, she got interested in plastic surgery and changed almost beyond recognition. But her childhood insecurities did not go away. She hates all the girls who are younger and prettier than her. Fiona envied you a lot, Claire. She asked me not to fix your appearance after the accident. I listened, and I regret it very much." I almost burst into angry tears, but quickly got a grip of myself. "And Sam? Why'd she get rid of him?" He reminded Fiona of what she used to look like before the surgeries. And his skin issues? Fiona couldn't bear to look at him. She also wanted to get married successfully and believed that a child would stand in her way. I was wrong after all. Fiona really wasn't that bad. She was even worse. A real monster, and no plastic surgery could fix it. Mr. Brown offered me free surgery to restore my looks. In exchange, he asked me to keep the whole situation secret. Dad wanted to refuse, but I agreed. Despite everything, Mr. Brown really was the best plastic surgeon in the city. I really didn't want to go through that whole nightmare again, but I promised myself to be strong, and I always kept my word. After a while, I had a déjà vu. I woke up in the same room as the previous time. I was covered with bandages and could hardly speak. That same day, Eric suddenly visited me. He apologized for avoiding me for so long. He just felt guilty and been afraid to approach me. It turned out Eric had refused to participate in the contest without me. "You've done so much for this project that I just couldn't do that to you. You'll see. We'll definitely win a bunch of contests in the future." He squeezed my hand tightly and I felt his fingers tremble. "And also, Claire, I don't care what you look like. Even if it turns out the surgery was unsuccessful, I still want to be with you. Of course, you don't resent me after everything." I did cry, this time with relief, and squeezed his fingers in response. During my rehabilitation, Eric took care of me. He turned on YouTube videos for me, read funny stories out loud, and fed me smoothies through a straw. The surgery was successful after all. I went back to looking almost like I used to before the incident in the cave. I had a small scar on my forehead, but it didn't bother me, especially since everyone in college started jokingly calling me Harry Potter. Fiona didn't know about my second surgery. Dad told her that we had gone to my grandmother in California for a month. While I had been in the hospital, Dad had been renting an apartment, so when I came home, it was a huge surprise for Fiona. When she saw me, she was speechless and turned green with anger. When my dad said he had filed for a divorce, Fiona tried to justify herself, but of course no one listened to her anymore. Dad kicked her out of the house, and I watched it happen with great pleasure. Mr. Brown promised he would send Fiona to a clinic where she would get therapy, but the most important thing was that I convinced Dad to adopt Sam, and now he lives with us. Sam, Eric, and I often hang out at the nearest McDonald's, where I eat very unhealthy but the most delicious burgers and fries in the world. I'm finishing a scientific project, and we plan to submit it to a contest next year. What are your family relationships like? Do you often envy someone? Tell us about it in the comments down below.